Hello, everybody. Thank you very much for joining me for another Alfred Hitchcock Presents review. Today I will be talking about Season 2, Episode 25, I Killed the Count, Part 1, starring John Williams as Inspector Davidson. And this is an interesting episode for one reason, and that is because this is actually a three-part episode, something different that has not yet been done on Alfred Hitchcock Presents. And I have to say, Part 1 is a solid setup. Although not a great episode, it's fine and watchable, and it does the job of what a good part 1 does, in my opinion. It makes you want to watch parts 2 and 3. So we start with the Count sitting in a chair, and everything seems to be normal as the maid comes in, until we find out that the Count is a goner. It turns out he's been shot. So this leads us to our main character, Inspector Davidson, and he comes by to investigate the case. He talks to the maid, who gives out some information, but none of it seems to be that helpful, in my opinion, even though he thanks her for her help. I guess he's just being polite. Then we also learn that the inspector is working with a Detective Raines, who's also working on the case. And these two men talk for a little bit, and we learn the inspector is very good at his job. He has a very high success rate at figuring these cases out, gathering clues and evidence. So eventually they gather more clues and evidence, and the episode is interesting at this point. And this leads them to a man named Sorrington, who the inspector talks to on the phone. And he says he doesn't know the Count, even though we know better because there's basically a letter saying that he does. So we get more clues and more suspects, and some of this feels a little bit like exposition, but the episode does a pretty good job overall of keeping it interesting. And we're led to another man named Froy. And we get more questioning of the employees. And we get more suspects, things like that. And it turns out that it is suspected that Froy is using another name, Rupert. And the inspector at this point thinks that Rupert and Froy are the same person and that must be our murderer. So the inspector eventually gets to talk to Froy about this, and at first Froy denies being there. He denies having anything to do with any of this, but when there is evidence shown to contradict his story, Froy abruptly confesses to the crime, which was very strange. He changes his mind very quickly. I thought this was interesting. So at this point, we go to the next scene, and Froy says, I did this, I'm guilty, but I'm not this Rupert person, which is confirmed by someone who would know. So the inspector seems a bit perplexed by this when Sorrington comes by, and he's not telling the truth about a lot of things. Eventually, he is identified as Rupert, which really kind of throws the inspector off. I was a little surprised by this, too. Thought this was a pretty nice twist. And he then confesses to being the one to kill the Count. And that's pretty much where part 1 ends. So now we have two people confessing to the crime. We're not sure at this point if they're in on it together, if they're both lying, if only one of them is guilty. So a very interesting setup. This is kind of one of those A to B episodes where the inspector comes by, he talks to a person, we find something out, then he talks to another person. This format isn't always the most exciting thing in the world, but it gets the job done. And overall, like I said, part 1 of I Killed the Count is interesting, and it does make me curious to see what will happen in parts 2 and 3. So I'm going to give I Killed the Count part 1 a 3 out of 5. I feel like this is a nice setup episode to make us, the audience, want to find out what happens next. So 3 out of 5 for I Killed the Count part 1, and as always, thank you very much for watching.